Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Nice to see you all. So, is there anything I want to say before we start our meditation? I don't think so. Let's just go right to it. So, setting up your posture, making sure you're supported so you can sit upright comfortably. And relax your shoulders, back straight, relax shoulders. And allow your awareness to descend into the sensations in your body. And you can take some deep breaths, releasing any worries, anything going on with you, untangling from your life on each exhale. And then thinking about a motivation for participating in this class. And we can spend a little time contemplating how much need there is in the world. How many people are having so many problems right now. Developing a feeling of empathy for all those beings who are dealing with financial difficulties or sickness or losing loved ones. And then a wish that if you could do anything, you would take that all away. You would stop that suffering because you care. And that you're going to participate in this class for the purpose of stopping that, leading others, showing others how to cope, how to be better, how to benefit others. So So, our purpose is to remove suffering for ourselves and others. And that's why we're here. That's why we're gathered. So, then returning to watching the breath. And you can watch it now at the level of the nose. Remembering to stay with the whole cycle of the breath, not just bits of it, but following the whole inhale and the whole exhale, and not getting lost in the gaps. And then again on the breath, you can spend some time releasing each time you exhale, releasing thoughts or sounds or sensations. And when you inhale, attending to the inhale, tightening the focus just slightly on the inhale. And then slowly coming out of the meditation. Okay, so let's do some review from yesterday. So, yesterday we talked about the types of meditation, and this actually comes from the first 2 weeks course that we did, but we also went into it a bit yesterday. So, we have calm abiding, which is the meditation that we were just working on. Um, Another thing about this meditation, when you're using the breath as the focus, is that this oscillation thing or this alternating thing is really helpful for what we were talking about in terms of the antidotes to excitement and the antidotes to dullness or laxity. That when you breathe in, you are um, increasing your focus and tightening up your focus slightly. And then when you breathe out, you're releasing. And so the inhale then becomes an antidote to dullness, or, that falling asleep, or that way in which you can space out sometimes in meditation. And breathing out is an antidote to the constant chatter and rumination that comes. So this is a really nice way to also engage the mind, because usually the mind has its own habits and it wants to run off and think of lots of different things. And in particular, they say that our biggest issue in meditation is attachment. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But as you start to observe what kinds of things distract you, they're usually something that has grabbed you in some way, something that you're hoping for, or something that you're afraid of. So something that is occupying your mind. And so learning to release that, learning to let go of that, becomes one of the parts of meditation. And the mind, again, the way we have remember that the mind has been in existence since beginningless time, so it has lots and lots of seeds of attachment and seeds of ignorance and seeds of all these other difficult emotions. So it's going to take time to learn to sort of mold our mind, because we don't want to suppress those things. We actually want to acknowledge them, but then let them go, release them. So, and when we talk about the different um, stages of meditation, it isn't until the biggest stages that we actually get to um, a releasing of that chatter. So if you still have, sort of a running stream of thoughts in your mind, either about your meditation practice or about other things that are on your mind, that's not surprising. The what happens is that the more that you relax and mold and train your mind and tame your mind, it becomes used to, and you become used to staying with one object. And then those other things just start to fade. They just start to not be so important. So you're not pushing them away and you're not suppressing them. You're just letting them fade. Just like when you're focusing on a movie. When you're watching a movie, if there's like some construction outside your house, right? You eventually, if you're absorbed in the movie, you won't even notice it. It'll still be there. And if you turn toward it, if you shift your attention to it, you can you'll notice it, but it's always there. Okay, so slowly, as we become more engaged with the object, then those other distractions, that coarse excitation, just starts to fade, but not through pushing away and not through force. That's not how it's done. It's a gentleness, and it's a consistently returning, saying, no, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to come here and I'm going to stay with this, and then staying with it as long as you can. And if you get pulled away again, you just bring it back. And this is meditation. So sometimes we have this view that, oh, I wasn't able to focus on my breath for most of the session, right? So you think, oh, I didn't meditate, right? But that isn't actually the meditation. The meditation is the training, the working with the mind, the consistently bringing it back over and over and over again. And this bringing back is supported by this relaxation. It's supported by the body and yeah, the body in particular being relaxed and being still. Because when you move, when you know, scratch your face or, you know, shift your legs or things like that, that has an effect on the mind. Um, yeah, yeah, maybe that's enough of that. And then we talked about the analytic meditation. So analytic meditation is the one that we're working with Felipe, where we're using topics, specific topics, and we're bringing our focused mind and our trained mind to explore and contemplate certain topics. And so the analytic meditation is where we start to develop the wisdom and sort of, what is it, activate our inner wisdom, because each one of us has a mind that is able to reason, that knows what is right for us, that knows what makes sense. And so learning to activate that with these different topics, you know, exploring what the teachings are saying, exploring our own experience, and then bringing those together to come to some kind of a conclusion. So, some kind of a decision that is usually has some, it may or may not, it depends, is maybe a new way of thinking for you, maybe a new way of examining things, like this idea of subtle impermanence, or like the idea of emptiness, or like the idea of bringing death, you know, into your focus, into your attention, the actuality of your own death and the uncertainty of when you will die. So so that it becomes an influence in our lives. It becomes something that, by contemplating it within meditation and taking it to a deeper level in our minds, then it starts to have an effect on the rest of our lives. Like I gave that example of how I practice a bit of gratitude, and not necessarily in formal meditation sometimes, but more just walking around, you know, like when I'm doing chores in my house, or, you know, coming down here to teach class, I'll think about all the things I am so grateful for. Or anytime I have enjoyment of something, like something makes me happy, I just, this gratitude, I cultivate gratitude. So then I was feeling bored, and I was feeling very stuck, you know, in my circumstances, because we're not going out. You know, like in India, the lockdown is pretty strict compared to other countries. I was talking to a friend from Israel, and maybe some of you are in Israel, but her nieces and nephews went back to school, and things are very much open in Israel, and I was kind of surprised about that. But so they're like, their country is kind of going back to normal. So anyway, I was feeling bored and I was feeling stuck, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this gratitude welled up. And I was like, well, maybe I am stuck, but I'm stuck in this amazing place, and, you know, with these great people, and I have this awesome life. And, you know, so it was something that I had consciously cultivated when I wasn't necessarily feeling it at the time, but I was building it up in my mind. And then when a delusion came along, or a difficult feeling came along, the antidote immediately was present for me, that gratitude. And then it was like the boredom and the stuckness and that kind of thing, it just disappeared. So it wasn't that I had to consciously bring the gratitude when the feeling was happening. It just kind of came because I had cultivated in other situations. And this is analytic meditation. This is using my wisdom, using the teachings to cultivate a state of mind that is an antidote to those difficult states of mind that we have. Okay. So then the third one that we talked about is mindfulness. And mindfulness, um, when you're doing it in terms of meditation, is like open awareness is a better term for it. And open awareness is not simply bare attention. So it isn't just attending to whatever sounds, sights, sensations, feelings, thoughts. It's also this sense of being in the present moment, being aware that we are aware at the same time as we are mindful of whatever is arising. Because that self awareness keeps us in the present moment. Otherwise, when we are doing open awareness and something comes into our minds, like, I have a thought of my home, my parents, and I immediately follow it. The mind wants to then start thinking about how they're doing and what's going on there and that sort of thing. But if I have this self awareness, then I'm also it's easier for me to let go of that, to come back into the present moment and see whatever is going to come next, whatever is going to arise. So as you're learning to watch the mind, to be aware of what is in the mind, you also are learning not to follow it. So what is the difference between a thought or an image arising and the difference between following it or pursuing it or elaborating on it? So these are all things that we tend to do. Our mind gets grasped, it gets Pema Chodron calls this shenpa, hooked. We get hooked, and we follow it. We follow whatever it is. And here we're learning to allow things to arise and allow them to let go. And this then creates this space between what is arising in our minds and this calmness, this self-awareness, this watcher that then allows us to let go of those things that are difficult. And if they come back, no problem, right? We just let go of them again. So sometimes if we're really dealing with a difficult situation and there's a real worry on our mind, or something has happened that's very disturbing for us, it may come back again over and over and over again. And so each time we need to acknowledge it and let it go when we're doing this open awareness, okay? When we're doing the open awareness meditation. Okay, so let's look at some of the antidotes that we talked about with calm abiding. So for this excitation, when the mind is very disturbed, being pulled away, like I was just talking about, by objects of attachment, or by ruminations, obsessive thinking, we can loosen the focus. So holding the object more lightly, using only part of the mind. When we do this oscillation, this is also helpful, because when we're doing the releasing, this is the loosening of the focus, and this is the antidote to the excitation. We can also lower our chin just slightly. You don't want to go way down, because then it helps you fall asleep. We can close our eyes a little bit. You still, in general, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we recommend that you learn how to meditate with your eyes at least partially open, at least a little bit open, because this will help in the later stages of shamatha, when this problem of subtle laxity or subtle dullness comes in. Because so that's one reason why we do it. Another reason why we do it is because sometimes our mind is really, really busy. And when we close our eyes, that's all we have, is this constant barrage of thoughts. But with the eyes open, if we are focusing on something that is like down in front of us, it doesn't move. Like if we're looking at the floor, or if we're looking at the wall, or if we're looking at someone's back, like in group meditation, in general, that doesn't move. And so having the eyes open, focusing on something that doesn't move, can be very helpful instead of when your eyes are closed and your mind is moving very fast. Okay, so this is another good reason to have the eyes open, but not too much. Okay, so then you have a balance here. You know, if they're open way too much, then you're going to be distracted by whatever is happening in the room, or, you know, so closing them slightly, but still having them, letting some light in. You can think of a serious topic, and then if you do get pulled away, you can relax your posture, release whatever it was you were thinking of, and then return to the topic. And we can do this, you know, many times in meditation. Okay. So then some antidotes to dullness, which is this like closing, you know, falling asleep. And you can lose the object here too. And this is another skill when you're learning to meditate, to observe that you can lose the object when it just sort of fades away, because you're letting it go out of focus. It's not that through excitation you've been pulled away by thoughts. It's more like it just sort of, you just like let it go. It loosens so much that it just kind of goes away. And you just space out. You're not really thinking about anything, and you're not thinking about your object of focus, and you're just kind of, yeah, blah in a way. So tightening the focus, as soon as you start to see that, bringing the focus a little bit tighter can help, but not too much, right? Because you don't want to go to the other extreme. Opening the eyes slightly, lifting the chin, raising the sternum, so your breastbone up, shoulders back. Imagine a bright light or an inspiring topic. And if you lose it, you refresh your interest in it. You find the breath again, or whatever it may be, you know, whether it's your awareness or whatever. And then you restore your focus on it, and then you retain it. You stay with it. So you stay with the breath instead of just letting it go. And if you're really falling asleep, you might need to take a break. Okay. So that's all I wanted to review. We do have the signs of progress that we talked about yesterday. Do you want to see those again today, or do you have them in your notes? You don't need to see them. Somebody wants to see them. No, you don't want to see them. Okay. So let's go on then. Okay. Whoops. So little more review from the last class. Talking about perception and the causes of suffering, because today we're going to talk about attachment. And attachment is, so when we talk about the sources of suffering from this Mahayana Tibetan Buddhist perspective, we say that there are three main poisons. They talk about the three poisons. Ignorance is one. Attachment, craving, desire is another one. I like calling it obsessive desire. And another one is anger or aversion. And so ignorance is actually the root of the other two, of attachment and aversion. And so when we're talking about attachment, what we're talking about is an exaggeration of the positive qualities of something. So this exaggeration comes about through the process of our perception of things. So whenever we meet something, you know, whenever what they call contact. So contact is always through the senses, right? You can only know physical phenomena through the senses. Okay, we can know other things through reasoning, but when we're talking about the senses, so whenever you see, taste, touch, hear, smell something, okay, whenever those sense perceptions happen, then you also have a feeling that arises in the body. not necessarily something complex, okay? Not as far as attachment yet, okay? Just a positive, negative, or neutral feeling. So within Buddhism, we talk about mental factors, okay? So meaning that whenever the mind contacts an object, there are certain things that automatically happened, okay? So when we receive some kind of sensory input, of course the mind responds. And the mind responds automatically with these different mental functions. And one of them is contact. It's like it recognizes an object. There's something there. There's a cup there. There's, a person there, that sort of thing. There is also the sense of there is attention to it, okay? Because of course we can have things that present themselves to our senses that we don't necessarily attend to, okay? Like right now, there's someone outside of this building who is sweeping. And once in a while, I can attend to the sweeping. And at other times, it is still the sound waves are coming into my ear, but because I am not attending to it, it's not in my mind, okay? So when it comes, when I do contact it, then I have this feeling, positive, negative, and neutral. And so sometimes the sweeping, I have a little bit of a negative feeling about it. It feels a little disturbing to me. And sometimes it's just a neutral thing. And sometimes that's about it. I don't usually feel positive about it. Later, I'll feel positive when I have appreciation for the person doing it. But in the first moment, I don't think I have it doesn't make me feel good to hear sweeping, okay? Other things make me feel good. Sometimes music, right? Okay. So that immediate response to the sensory input, you can see how it is a very basic thing. It's positive, negative, neutral. And then from that, from that, we make a discrimination, okay? So we make sort of a labeling in some ways of that thing. And one of the things that we do when we label it is we put that good feeling, that neutral feeling, or that negative feeling in the sound. So the sound becomes inherently pleasant, inherently neutral, or inherently negative. We automatically assume that because we believe it's coming from the outside of us and presenting itself to us, that actually the feeling of positive, negative, or neutral is in the thing, okay, is in the sweeping. And so if I don't like the sweeping, then instead of recognizing, okay, so let me go back a little. So I have the negative perception of the sweeping. Now, what is the basis of me believing that thing is inherently negative, that it is a disturbing sound, okay? What is my basis of that? Because the feeling has arisen in me. But what I also have in my mind is I have an ignorance. I have a belief that things exist dually, right? That things exist separately. That sound of sweeping in that person over there is completely separate from this person right here, okay? And so they're doing this thing and that sound is occurring out here and my reaction to it is occurring in here. But because I believe that those are inherently separate, I say that the negative is coming from out there, okay? So then what is my response to it? If it's a negative feeling, my response is, I want to push that away. I want to stop that thing. Because the only way I'm going to get rid of that negative feeling in my mind that has arisen, because I believe it's coming from that thing, is if I get rid of that situation, if I stop that situation. Because I have this perception that it is inherently separate from me, and it is coming, the experience is coming from the thing. Okay, so when we looked at emptiness, we looked at the emptiness of things. We started to examine how the mind participates in the reality so that things don't have a separate existence from our minds. If they did, then they would be telling us what they are, from their own side, and everyone would see them exactly the same way that we do. Okay, so okay, so we can elaborate on those two. I'll say those two again. If things existed separately from our minds, then, for example, this cup would be, can't see it, this cup would be saying from its own, gestures don't work so well, would be saying from its own side, I am a cup, right? It would have within it cupness, okay? Something from the side of the cup that would say it's a cup, okay? But it doesn't exist in that way. In fact, when we start to look for cupness within the cup, separate from my mind that is labeling it a cup, we can't find it. We start taking it apart, we look for it in the parts, okay? And we can't find it. What we find is actually the mind has to put together all those different aspects of the cup in order for us to label it a cup, in order for it to exist as a cup, okay? Now, of course, there's a thing there. I'm not saying there's not a thing, but then once again, when we say there's a thing out there, we get into this same process of this labeling of a thing, the concept of a thing. There's nothing from the side of this that says I am a thing, okay? So we aren't saying that it's all in the mind either. We're not saying that I just have a concept of a cup and I can label anything. You know, this clock, I can label a clock a cup. That doesn't work because it doesn't have a basis, a valid basis of a cup. Okay, so meditating on emptiness, the emptiness of things, can help us to start to get rid of that misperception of things as existing so separately from our minds. So then if I recognize how my mind labels the sweeping, okay, identifies that there's a person out there, that there's sweeping going on, there's a sound out there, and I have this feeling that has arisen that is negative, I can start to see how I put the negative feeling on the separate thing. When in fact, the whole experience of sweeping and the sound of sweeping and the experience of negativity is something that is also occurring in my mind, that my mind is a part of it, and that it wouldn't exist in the way that it does without my mind participating. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Okay, so let's look again at, you've seen this before, I'm sure, of how perception works. We have some kind of a sense perception. In this case, it's a flower and the photons that are creating a certain impression in our eyes, in our mind. And then an image arises within our mind, and we have those arrows are certain things that we do to the image that exists in our mind. So, for example, we see the flower as permanent, even though from the perspective of our senses are able to receive, you know, when they're receiving photons, the photons are constantly changing, But as soon as it gets converted into that image into our mind, we immediately see it as permanent because we don't have the capacity to see its constantly changing nature. So we forget that it's actually constantly changing. And so we impose this view of permanence on it. In the same way, when we have that positive feeling, we also impose beautiful on it, okay? And we impose this idea of independent on it, even though that isn't the way that it exists. And this big arrow under here is the forgetting. So it's where we take these arrows that we have done to this image and we assume that the image exists out there in the way that our minds have perceived it, okay? In the way that our minds have conceived it to be, okay? So when we're talking about attachment, what we do with attachment is that we see the flower, we get a positive feeling from it. We think that the positive feeling is coming from the flower, so we immediately want to hold on to that. We want to grasp at it. We want to bring it to us. We want to continue to have the good feeling, so we want to have the flower all the time because that's the source of our good feeling. And we do this with many different things. And oftentimes the source of much of our dissatisfaction is the fact that the flower will eventually not give us the pleasure that it always has because the flower is, going away. It's deteriorating. Okay. So then what we do is as soon as the thing doesn't make us feel good anymore, then we want the next thing. We become attached to the next thing. We say, oh, that is going to make me feel good. So then I start clinging to that thing and grasping at that thing. And as soon as maybe I get it, maybe I don't. But after a while, it changes, we change. And then we need something else to make us feel happy. So there's this constant cycle of dissatisfaction over and over again. And this was a huge part of the truth of suffering that the Buddha talked about, is this constant desire that we believe exists in external things. And when we're trying to develop this internal, this lasting happiness, it starts to be a way in which we can be happy no matter what the external circumstances are, okay? But first, see, the difficulty is that our attachment blinds us to the way things actually exist. Our wanting them to stay the same, to continue to give us happiness, prevents us from seeing that they are constantly changing, that they are gonna go away, that they're gonna that they're going to end. And eventually, if we rely on them for our happiness, we're going to be disappointed. Okay, so let's look at what attachment is. Okay, so attachment exaggerates the positive aspects. So as soon as we get a good feeling from this thing and we believe it exists out there, not only that, this delusion makes us only look for good aspects of it. Like when you're thinking about spending a lot of money on a new phone, okay? Your phone becomes the best. It's got all these features and you start totally convincing yourself of how great your new phone is, right? So it exaggerates the positive aspects. And it sees the object or the person as the source of lasting happiness. If I have this phone, it's going to make me happy, right? And then grasps or clings, and we become willing to spend, a lot of money on phones, right? Even though they have all these things that we'll never use. I love my teacher, Young Rinpoche. He came and visited just last year, and he had a flip phone. He was like, he wasn't a smartphone. If you can imagine somebody in this year 2020 who still has a flip phone, and that totally shows you that he is not attached. He is not stuck to that at all. And it worked fine. Well, he also has a tendency to do a lot of the technology stuff for him, but for him, this flip phone was enough. He didn't need more. And he knew, because he knew that's not where my happiness comes from, right? Okay, so we grasp or we cling to the object of person. And then what brings even more suffering is that when these things change, when they are no longer the source, they no longer give us the same feeling of positive feeling, then we get disappointed. When the phone breaks, when the phone becomes obsolete, all these things that can happen. And they happen with everything that is the product of causes and conditions. Everything that is impermanent, it happens to. So, our tendency to grasp or cling is actually it's just creates so many problems. And one of the antidotes to attachment is seeing the disadvantages of getting attached. Oh, my nose is itching. So one of the disadvantages we've been talking about so far is the fact that we are consistently disappointed. If we expect happiness from external things, we are consistently going to be disappointed, which doesn't mean that we take this view of renunciation where we give everything up and we never enjoy anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, don't ever enjoy people and, situations and objects in your life. What I'm saying is at the same time that you are enjoying them, you also are recognizing that they're going to leave, that they're going to be gone someday. And in some ways, actually, that makes your enjoyment that much more precious. Instead of being disappointed when they go, you're comfortable with it. You're like, well, of course they were going to go. Of course it was going to end. So you're ready for those things to stop. But when we cling and we grasp, we create lots of problems for ourselves. So then what are some of the antidotes? How do we stop ourselves when we recognize this attachment? How do we stop it, right? And the most powerful antidote is remembering their constantly changing nature, their impermanence. And then we practice letting go. So say we're deciding that we're going to go on a vacation, and many of you may have had vacations or travel plans, like that were planned for before this virus hit, right? And so when we were planning and when you're attempting to create this positive thing in your life, at the same time you're also having this sense of, well, if it doesn't happen, that's okay too. Okay, so it's at the same time that you're anticipating and enjoying the anticipation, you also have an aspect of your mind that says, and it may not happen, and that's okay, I'll still be happy. So this is this process of letting go, of recognizing that everything changes, and so letting go now makes a lot more sense than waiting until it's taken away from you. Okay, having gratitude and contentment also helps you not develop attachment for things, because whatever you have is perfect. You are enough. You have so much inside of you, and so much possibility for happiness that is not dependent on things. You know, just sitting and looking inward is so much the source of happiness. Developing love in your heart makes you happy. Wanting others to be happy. You know, so much of, you know, things that we can do. Yeah. Okay. So more practical concerns, ways to develop antidotes, thinking about the disadvantages of attachment, remembering the negative aspects of desirable people, objects, and situations. So when you start falling in love with someone, having this sort of balanced, wise mind that recognizes that that person is going to have faults. It's just gonna come with the territory. And it's not that you don't want to still fall in love with them and have a nice relationship with them, but then you have this balanced view that when, as your relationship progresses and you start to see that they also have these other aspects of themselves, it doesn't destroy your love. It doesn't destroy your connection to the person. Because sometimes when we become attached to people and it lasts for, you know, 2 or 3 years, and then they start, I was just watching one comedy about how this man was talking about how he married his wife's mother because his wife was so much like her mother. So when you start recognizing these things, you just see, oh, that's part of the person. And it took me a really long time to be more accepting of people's faults. And I wonder if it didn't happen as I became more accepting of my own faults. I wonder if that's when I was able to, you know, I stayed friends with people even when they did things I didn't like, because that's all of us. You know, we all have positive and negative aspects of ourselves. So this balanced view, like if you know, if you want to buy a phone, you just recognize, you know, how much are you willing to spend, which is the negative side of it. How long is it really going to last? So I'm really into technology, as you can tell. I like my computers and tablets and phones and stuff. So I have started, you know, I looked it up, and like the length of time for something to last, like an Apple iPhone or an iPad, is like 3 years, right? At the most, I think you can get maybe 4 years out of it. But that's how they're built, you know? And a laptop or a desktop, 4 or 5 years, right? So now I start anticipating, like, okay, this is not going to last forever. I'm going to need to replace this after 3 years. So I keep track of my purchase dates. How old is my device, right? And am I really, how much am I, you know, getting attached to it, knowing it's going to go? And you know, if you're attached to something, when you imagine losing it, when you imagine it being taken away from you, what is your feeling when when you imagine it being gone? Are you comfortable with that? Do you recognize that as part of life, that is how things exist? Or are you overwhelmed, you know, with loss and you know, just a sense in your heart that you just can't take it, right? It's just awful. I went through, you may have heard the story of my dog. And I'll make this brief because I want to get to questions. So the last one is recognizing how our mind creates the experience of obsessive desire. And we're going to do a meditation on this so you'll be able to explore for yourself some things that you are attached to. I had a dog, and he was my best friend for a really long time, for like 16 years. I had other human friends too, but he stuck with me, right? And I stuck with him. And when he was 16, so that's kind of old for his breed, he lost the use of his legs, and I thought he was gonna die, right? I thought this was the beginning of the end. And I wasn't in such a great roommate situation. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of loss, of just like how crushed I was gonna be when he passed away. And so what I did was of course I took him to the vet and he got some medicine and he got the use of his legs back. And so he actually lived for another year. But what I recognized was that I have to prepare myself. I have to get ready for when he's going to be gone for good. And so I started imagining and meditating on what life would be like without him, and what would I do with his funeral, and how would I grieve, how would I tell people, and what would his, the last moments of his life be like. And so I prepared myself. I got ready for it. It wasn't that I wanted him to die. I didn't bring his death, right? It was that this is the reality. And so I got ready for it. And then when he did die, it was a pretty positive experience. I had friends come over, who did prayers for him. I had friends come over, help me take him to his body to the vet. So it was like, I was sad, but I was not as crushed as I was when I imagined the before, when I was so attached to him and so dependent on him. And so, he was my stability and the source of my happiness in so many ways. So this is a way that we can get ourselves ready, imagining, contemplating impermanence. Okay, so if you have some questions, we can do that now.
Yes, there's already questions in chat. I'll start with Bridget.
Okay, Bridget.
Bridget Murphy.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you again for continuing to hold the space. I had asked you actually a question a few weeks ago around, very similar to what you had just shared around kind of death and grieving parents. And, just recently actually just had an experience where my father had an emergency and it was unclear if he was going to make it out of the surgery. So kind of going through the process of, it was just a good 24 hours of just sitting in this space of unknown. And, trying to, what you just shared, I remembered that story of kind of trying to get into this place of visualizing kind of the reality of impermanence, that we lose parents, we lose people that we love. But in that very kind of primal crisis of not knowing what was going to happen with him, and just for the first time experiencing that to that level of this unknown, it was so overwhelming and just created this feeling of hopelessness of what that meant. And he did make it out. So he is he's still in the hospital, but he's in recovery. And then just, visualizing his suffering, and I don't know what his suffering is, because I know that's the mind that's creating that, but just trying to honor, his experience as well. So I guess of just, being in that place of kind of feeling kind of death, my fear of my family, my parents dying is my greatest fear, which is an inevitable truth.
Mm-hmm.
But, I guess my question of how to find the balance in this spiritual practice of not kind of falling into this place of like the hopelessness, while also kind of practicing that insight around, yes, it is, impermanence and this attachment to parents and family that will pass, and death is inevitable. But I don't know, it just feels so extreme when it's so close.
Yeah, and it especially when it's right up, like you said, close. Then the feelings are so overwhelming. I'm curious about what the hopelessness. Talk a little more about that. Hope, like, yeah. What do you mean? No hope about what?
I guess I've just experienced, of what you're sharing around the attachment of, the attachment to objects, I get that. It's talking about the, parents or the two people who do mean the most to me, or who I can see the source of happiness. And then imagining, my dad passing away at this point, or my mom passing away, it does become just, it just feels so, it's just that intensity of sadness. We're just seeing, the world. When we were doing the precious human life or the gratitude, it feels like there is that disconnect around, finding that place of gratitude with that place of, yes, death is imminent and the attachment to our loved ones, but going through that process just feels just so sad.
Okay. Okay.
And then doing the insight practice around visualizing, family pass or parents passing away, or connecting to that impermanence just feels so, just sad.
Well, I mean, the other side of impermanence is also recognizing that you you will go on even after they're gone, like, and you will find happiness again, and you will find strength and courage through going through that process. So if it's hopelessness about, and I mean, sadness for missing them, I think is natural and totally fine. Like having some sadness about it is, I wouldn't, but it's when it's overwhelming, when it's extreme, like I can't live without them. So then imagining life without them and finding happiness when they're gone, and how are you going to do that? Because they would want that for you too.
Right.
And then, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that valuing your time with them. Just seeing that it was amazing that you had this whole life with them and what they gave to you, and that this becomes a source of gratitude and contentment that you did know your parents. And there are people who never knew their parents, who never had relationships with their parents. And yeah, so like my dad is he's 100 years old, and the last time I visited him in January, I was saying goodbye, because I don't know if he's going to be alive when I see him again. And it was so touching and so close to have this. I have this moment with you where I'm telling you and feeling my love for you at the same time that I'm recognizing I may never see you again. And it takes it to an incredible depth that is not hopeless. It's actually it's also a joy that I knew you, and all the things we had together, and how you are a part of me, how you are, I live on, you live on in me, and like that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, we do have to work with those, though. We definitely have to spend time with them instead of trying to pretend, or ignore, or like that, which is what we tend to do, because it's not, like you said, until it's in our face, we don't really think about it much. Okay, another one?
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
There's one question from Kavya.
Hello.
Hello.
Venerable.
Hi.
Hi. So my question was about this idea of separation from what is in the world, and separation from Maya is something that's kind of there for a long time in our traditions, but I always find this kind of a paradox. I'm confused on how, because when somebody practices this kind of separation, or this kind of assuming that this is going to be impermanent, like for example, you go into a relationship assuming that it is not going to be permanent, it's not going to go forever, makes one behave in ways that shows that you're assuming it's not going to go on forever. Eventually kind of that will surface in your actions, and that can really hurt the other person who who might not have the same view of it and might be really attached. So my question is it really a good idea to go into sort of relationships with that kind of a attitude? Because it does hurt the other people around you if you're having an attitude that, this is not permanent.
Okay. So when we're talking about not permanent, we aren't necessarily saying that you're going to divorce or separate. We are saying that one or the other partner is going to die. So it's not, you wouldn't necessarily go into a committed relationship, like have a marriage that you were assuming is going to end in divorce. You wouldn't necessarily go in with that. What you would go in with is this understanding that as the two of you grow older, that you're going to become different people. That you, and this is, I don't, you're not necessarily hurting the person by having this point of view. If they don't have the same point of view of recognizing that you're going to change and they're going to change and one of you are going to die one of these days, it doesn't mean you have to force that on them. But you having that view, that attitude, will actually help you to appreciate that person while you have them. And your appreciation of them will actually make them happier. Okay? So sometimes I think when we think of imagining something ending, we think that that means that we have to push people away so that we don't get hurt. And this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have to have an understanding that change is going to happen and we are going to love you anyway. Because the source of my ultimate happiness is not who you are now. The source of my happiness is inside me, and I can choose to be happy no matter what kind of a person you become. So then, but when you're with me, I love you and I appreciate you for who you are. But if you change, I also love you and appreciate you for who you are. So so I think this assumption that having an understanding that they're going to change doesn't mean that we don't love them and that we don't connect to them. Because we are making a distinction between attachment and romantic love. Okay? Attachment, well,
yeah, I don't mean only in terms of romantic love, for example, because well, I did use that as an example. Like to tell you the truth, my father is a very deep person who's studied the Bhagavad Gita and all for his whole life, and he is a really calm and this kind of unruffled person no matter what happens. But the kind of I see that this kind of he's unruffled, which is fine, which is possibly great for when we were kids. We had someone who was absolutely stable. But I can now, as I'm older, I can see that the kind of effect it has had on my mother has not been so great, because it gives the feeling that he doesn't care.
Oh,
right? He does care. He's very kind. I mean, he looks after all our needs and he does a lot of things. But that kind of sense of lack of attachment kind of gives her the feeling that he doesn't really care.
Oh,
So
yeah.
So I want to understand how I can reach that kind of stability without having that kind of a negative effect.
Yeah. I think it's the way I answered it before. Stability doesn't mean indifference. It means that your happiness is not dependent on the other person, that you can be happy. And when you know that, when you know you can be happy, and you develop a strength and you develop a stability, and it allows you to express love without worrying that you are not going to get it in return, or that the person is going to disappear. When you have that strength within you, so sometimes people shut their emotions down because they're afraid of the pain. So then they don't connect because they're afraid of the pain. And I'm talking about creating a strength within you that allows you to love even if they're going to disappear.
Okay.
All right. So we had a question from Akash from yesterday that I didn't get to answer.
Oh yeah, I think Akash is connected now.
He's here? Okay. It was about medicine Buddha. Akash, do you want to ask your question, or do you just want me to talk about medicine Buddha?
So, morning, Drolma. So, if you could speak a little bit about medicine Buddha. I've been chanting the mantra, and that's all I know. So, if there is little bit more that I can do to enhance my well-being
Okay.
in this sense, so that will be little helpful.
Okay. So medicine Buddha is a deity, the Buddhist deity of healing, and also the practice that we do when someone has passed away, if we want to create the conditions, be an influence for them to have a positive rebirth. It's also something that is used for success. And deities within Tibetan Buddhism are not only external enlightened beings who have become enlightened, but they're also reflections of our own internal inner knowing, our own Buddha nature. So one thing that you can do while you're chanting the mantra is that you can visualize medicine Buddha above you. They talk about it in, in the space in front of you, in front of your forehead, and kind of a little bit higher than you. And you visualize while you're chanting that you are receiving healing light from them, or the healing blue, it's blue because medicine Buddha is blue, healing blue light that is also going to medicines that for others, or to other people who you want to heal, or so you can imagine this light coming down. And they say you visualize it 3 times, so 3 different times you're receiving the blue healing light, and then from your own heart, blue healing light goes out to all beings to bring, relief from suffering, healing. And so that you can add this visualization as well while you're chanting the mantra. Is that okay?
Yes, Drolma, that's fine. So I've been practicing this mantra to heal. So I have a chronic inflammatory uh, problem, and I've been trying to chant this mantra just to see if my ailment subsides a bit, where it makes me comfortable to carry out some day-to-day activities.
Mm-hmm.
But I've now, is there a way where I should be meditated in a closed room, or can I do it while doing my daily activities also and chant?
Yes, you can do it either way, is fine.
Okay. Okay. I had one more question on meditation.
I'm sorry,
So when I do meditation,
Akash, we don't have time.
yes.
So
Okay.
let's do it tomorrow.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
Okay, so because we need to start meditation now.
We'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go into the meditation part. So everyone, please set up your postures once again. Make sure your body is comfortable and stable. Make sure that you're grounded. And taking a couple of minutes to relax the body. This time, doing the preparation briefly. And in order to do this, you can take a few deep breaths, getting rid of all the air in the lungs, releasing all the tension, and then breathing in fully and completely feeling the lungs again. Allowing any tension or agitation in the body to dissipate. Going back to that experience of your body in its natural state, calm, relaxed, stable, still, and yet alert. Letting go of observing the body now, bringing your attention inwardly. We'll start this meditation by bringing to mind different objects of attachment. And these objects of attachment can be things or people or places. So simply go through a mental list of things that you're attached to. And then you can go ahead and choose one object in particular, perhaps one that you're most attached to. And try to visualize this object as clearly as possible in front of you, but especially trying to get the feeling that this object is present. And check your own emotional reaction to having the object of attachment present. How does the mind feel? Does it manifest in the body in any form? Check and see for yourself. And as we've learned, attachment is a mind which exaggerates the positive qualities of an object and then wants to possess it. So try to see if you can identify the qualities or characteristics that you attribute to the object, that which attracts you to it. You can check your senses to see if what pulls you from the object is the way that it looks, the way that it feels to the tact, the way that it smells, the taste. Or perhaps it's a mental attitude, is because you feel comfortable with the object, you feel satisfied or pleased, you feel safe. So take a moment to analyze if these qualities are actually present within the object itself. If that were true, then shouldn't everyone see those same exact qualities as well? For example, if you think that the object of attachment is beautiful, then absolutely everyone in the world should see it as beautiful as well. But we know that's not possible. So check to see if your own perception, if your own ego are involved in the process of seeing certain qualities enhanced. So with this, maybe you can notice how actually we project the qualities into the object. Usually it would seem as if the object was screaming its qualities at us. Look at me, I'm beautiful. But often it's the other way around. We see something and we think, that's beautiful to me. And another attribute that we project onto the object is that of permanence. So observing this person, thing, or place in front of you, do you have a sense that this object of attachment will always be there to satisfy your needs and give you constant happiness? Don't just answer intellectually. It could be even a subconscious thing that you actually think this object is permanent and not changing. So really check, analyze deeply. And even if you kind of know that the object is changing, you kind of accept it, and yet there's something within yourself that wants it to be permanent, not to change, not to go away, to stay just as it is. But is that even possible? Try to bring an awareness of impermanence in order to acknowledge how the object is changing. Noticing how, just like everything in the universe, this object will change and eventually dissolve. Ask yourself, can this bring me everlasting happiness? What is there to cling to? Now imagine that you bring the object very close to you, holding it tightly. You can even have a sense that there are others around you trying to take it or pull it away from you. And so you cling harder, try to grasp at the object with more energy. And check how the mind feels when you're doing this. Do you think that this is sustainable? That you can cling endlessly to the object? Notice if your mind is calm and stable while you're doing this, or if it becomes agitated, tense, and tight. Now imagine that you gently open up your arms and let go of the object. Take a step back and then another one. And once you have created a little bit of distance between yourself and your object of attachment, simply allow it to stay and see if you can actually enjoy its presence. How does your mind feel now? Compared to the previous experience of clinging and grasping desperately? Do you feel calmer and more relaxed as you release your grip on the object? And finally, allow the object in front of you to dissolve, slowly and gently disappear. Or you can even imagine that you offer it to somebody who really needs it or wants it. And then simply allow everything to dissolve. Let go of any concepts, of any thoughts, of any images. And just abide for a moment with the clear nature of your own mind. Try to feel that sense of calmness, that sense of joy that comes with it. Here there is no objects of attachment, and then you can still experience happiness, peace. So you can conclude with the thought that the mind of attachment creates problems for ourselves and for others. But we can actually make a conscious choice to relate to things in a lighter way, without this quality of grasping and clinging, and to acknowledge that we can find happiness within us without relying on external objects. And slowly coming out of the meditation, notice once again your body, your surroundings. And then we dedicate the merit. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and find repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's our Friday. And I'll put up the questions in the chat. If you'd like to stay for the discussion groups, please do. Otherwise, have a good day or a good night or whatever, afternoon. Bye.